very difficult for outsiders to realize that China can both have a very dynamic economic system and the appearance of a modern, open society with the reality of an authoritarian police state. The Chinese leadership is very concerned about the risk of unrest in the country, and the risk also that Chinese society becomes more aggressive in demanding its rights. Any critic of the government who tries to bring attention to the deep social problems that exist in China immediately becomes an enemy of the state. Charter 08 is a political manifesto signed by the broadest coalition of reformers that we've seen in China since 1989. It's making reference to Charter 77, a document that Václav Havel and other intellectuals published 30 years ago, calling for the country to become more democratic and respectful of human rights. The people who are behind Charter 08 are pushing for broad political reform in China, calling for realization of the rights that are guaranteed under the Chinese Constitution, freedom of expression, freedom of publication, freedom of association. It's not a political manifesto to overthrow the Communist Party.
Originally signed by 300 intellectuals, Charter 08 quickly accumulated 10,000 signatures and supporters from all walks of life. Here, rural Chinese come to the capital, citing Charter 08 and asking for human rights.
When the Chinese government felt challenged by the ideals of peaceful, democratic evolution of the political system in China, they chose Liu Xiaobo, the main drafter of Charter 08, to make an example out of him. A peaceful, intellectual dissident whose only crime has been to write words on paper and try to get people to read them.
The Chinese government was definitely trying to make an example of him to really send a message that advocating for reform in China was not acceptable. They locked him up for 11 years, not for any action, but really for peaceful criticism and advocacy for reform within China.
Liu Xiaobo has long been the most prominent advocate for human rights and the rule of law in China. In 1989, around the time of the Tiananmen demonstration, he was the professor in Beijing who sided with the students and tried to help the democracy movement achieve its goal peacefully. He's also the one who negotiated with the People's Liberation Army the exit of the students from Tiananmen Square before the tanks rolled in. So he saved countless lives. He was imprisoned for several years after. He was put under house arrest. He had police surveillance for the best of 2 decades, yet never gave up and never decided to go into exile. He thought that his role was to stand with the Chinese people in China. Human rights in China are no longer a matter of ideological battle between the West and China or between democracy and communism. The battle is really between Chinese society and the state. So international human rights organizations can lend their voices and can report on these problems that cannot be discussed in China. With Charter 08, Liu Xiaobo knowingly sacrificed himself. He's paying a huge price to show the real face of the Chinese government.